All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to be looking at how government interventions tangle with the raw underlying forces of supply and demand. We interact with markets literally every single day, but we rarely stop to think about the invisible mechanics driving the prices we pay or the wages we take home. So today, we're unpacking some core principles of economics. Specifically, we're looking at what happens when policymakers decide to step in and alter the rules of the game. So here's a question for you. Can a law magically make housing cheaper or wages higher? I mean, really think about that for a second. As a society, when we see a price that feels way too high or a wage that seems way too low, our first instinct is usually to just pass a law to fix it, right? We want to decree that things should be fairer. But as we're going to see throughout this explainer, there is a massive difference between what we expect a law to do and the actual mathematical reality of what happens in a market. And that brings us to the concept of price controls. Policymakers use price controls when they genuinely believe that the market price of a good or service is just too high for buyers to afford, or maybe too low for sellers to survive on. The motivation? It's almost always rooted in a desire for fairness. But here's the catch. While they are totally motivated by good intentions, these policies often generate surprising and honestly sometimes painful new problems. Let's see exactly how that happens. Section 1. When maximums cause shortages. The reality of price ceilings. So, a price ceiling is exactly what it sounds like. It's a legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold. Basically, the government puts a metaphorical roof over the price, saying you absolutely cannot charge more than this. The most famous and probably the most fiercely debated example of a price ceiling in modern economics is rent control, where city governments cap how much landlords are allowed to charge for housing. Now, there's a really crucial distinction between a rule that actually matters and a rule that, well, doesn't. A price ceiling only works if it forces a change. Say the market naturally prices something at $3, and the government sets a ceiling of $5. Well, that's not binding. It has zero effect because the price was already below the ceiling anyway. But on the flip side, we have a binding constraint. This happens when the government sets that maximum price below the natural market equilibrium. When that happens, the natural market price becomes illegal and the price is forced down until it hits that ceiling. Let's ground this in a simple, delicious example. Imagine the market for muffins naturally settles at $3, but the government steps in and sets a binding price ceiling of $2, just to make muffins affordable for everyone. Well, at $2, buyers are thrilled. They demand 18 muffins. But the bakers, looking at that $2 price tag, they're a lot less incentivized. They only supply 10 muffins. So the crucial point is right there in the math. We have 18 muffins demanded, but only 10 supplied. We've basically just legislated a sudden shortage of 8 muffins. And when that shortage hits, things get messy fast. Because the price is locked and can't act as the impartial referee to balance things out anymore, sellers have to find a totally new way to ration their scarce goods. Shortages arise. You start seeing long lines, which just wastes buyers' precious time. It introduces the personal bias of sellers. Maybe the baker only sells those 10 muffins to his friends or to a specific demographic. The whole allocation becomes incredibly inefficient. A person who desperately wants a muffin might not get one, while someone who only kind of wants it but just happened to be first in line does. Ultimately, a policy designed for fairness ironically ends up creating deeply unfair outcomes. Which brings us back to rent control. Consider this statement that was evaluated by the IGM Economic Experts Panel. They were asked if local ordinances limiting rent increases have had a positive impact on the amount and quality of affordable rental housing. The general consensus among these top economists is that, in the long run, price ceilings on rent cause significant shortages and actually diminish the quality of housing. It's a hugely debated topic precisely because the intended goal of affordable housing clashes so hard with the harsh reality of diminished supply. Section 2. When minimums cause surpluses, the reality of price floors. Okay, so a price floor is a legal minimum on the price at which a good can be sold. You cannot legally drop the price below this floor. Now, while price ceilings are usually used to protect buyers, price floors are typically put in place to protect sellers or providers. And the absolute most prominent example of a price floor? Minimum wage laws, which dictate the lowest legal price a business can pay for a worker's labor. Let's head back to our muffin bakery. The natural price was $3, but this time, the government enacts a binding price floor, stating muffins cannot be sold for less than $4 to protect the baker's incomes. Well, at $4, bakers are highly incentivized. They joyfully bake 20 muffins. But buyers? They're hesitant at that price. They only demand 12 muffins. The result? we have 20 muffins supplied and only 12 demanded. We now have a surplus of 8 unsold steel muffins just sitting there on the counter. Now apply that exact same logic to the labor market. This quote from the IGM Economic Experts Panel notes that a federal minimum wage of $15 per hour would lower employment for low-wage workers in many states. Just like a high price for muffins creates a surplus of unsold muffins, a binding price floor on wages, meaning it's set above the natural market rate for certain jobs, creates a surplus of labor. And within this economic framework, a surplus of labor translates directly to unemployment.
Section 3. The tax burden illusion. Who really pays?
Before we debunk a massive myth here, we need the right vocabulary. We're talking about tax incidence. This is simply the manner in which the burden of a tax is shared among participants in a market. Notice the word shared. That is absolutely key. Because when the government levies a tax, the person who actually writes the check to the government isn't necessarily the one who bears the true economic pain of that tax. All right, imagine this. In one scenario, we have a tax levied on the sellers, let's say a 50-cent tax on every ice cream cone a vendor sells. In the other scenario, we have a tax levied on the buyers, a 50-cent tax added right at the register for the consumer to pay. I want to ask you, which scenario do you think is mathematically worse for the consumer? Does taxing the corporation protect the buyer, or does taxing the buyer hurt the buyer more? And here is the incredible punchline. The outcome is perfectly equivalent. It literally does not matter whether the government taxes the buyer or the seller. Economically speaking, the tax just inserts a wedge between what the buyer pays and what the seller actually gets to keep. The market shrinks, buyers end up paying a higher total effective price, and sellers end up pocketing less money. No matter whose name is on that tax form, the economic burden is shared identically between both parties. Let's apply this wedge concept to something a lot of you probably see on your pay stubs: payroll taxes. Lawmakers legally split the payroll tax, saying, okay, half is paid by the firm and half is paid by the worker. But guess what? Economic forces do not care about legal definitions. This tax simply places a massive wedge between the total cost a firm pays to employ you and the actual take-home pay you receive. Legally splitting the tax 50-50 absolutely does not dictate who economically suffers for it. The market dictates that. Section 4. Elasticity and the escape route. The master rule of tax incidence. So here is your master rule, clearly stated. The tax burden falls more heavily on the side of the market that is less elastic. But what does that actually mean? Well, think of elasticity as the willingness or the ability to just leave a market when conditions get bad. It's an escape route. If a tax makes things too expensive, can you easily go buy something else? If a tax makes production unprofitable, can the factory easily pivot to making a totally different product? Let's contrast these two states. First, we have small elasticity of demand. This means buyers lack good alternatives. Think of life-saving medicine. If they tax it, buyers can't just leave the market. They have to buy it. Their escape route is completely blocked. On the other side, small elasticity of supply. Sellers lack alternatives. Think of a beachfront hotel. If you tax the land, the hotel owner can't exactly pick up the beach and move it to another state, right? Whoever has fewer escape routes gets stuck holding the bag and paying the lion's share of the tax. So the crucial point is summarized perfectly right here. If supply is highly elastic, meaning sellers can easily flee the market, but demand is inelastic, meaning buyers are trapped, the buyers are going to bear almost all of that tax burden. Conversely, if supply is inelastic, meaning sellers are stuck with their specialized factories, but buyers have tons of alternatives and are highly elastic, well, the sellers end up absorbing the cost. It's not about fairness, folks. It is entirely about flexibility. Let's tie all these lessons together with one final, relatable, real-world thought experiment from our source material. Imagine a scenario where a state really needs revenue. The governor proposes a tax on food. But recognizing that less wealthy individuals spend a huge portion of their income on groceries, the governor insists the tax will be placed entirely on food sellers, specifically to protect the consumers. Based on everything we've covered today, I'm going to leave you with this final, vital question. Since everyone absolutely must eat, meaning the demand for food is incredibly inelastic, will the burden of this tax actually fall only on the sellers? Well, as we've seen, the answer is a resounding no. Because people cannot simply escape buying food, the sellers will easily just pass that cost along. The tragic irony of market forces is that the inelastic demand for necessities means the very people the governor is trying to protect will inevitably end up paying the price. It's a powerful reminder that in economics, good intentions are never a substitute for understanding how the machinery actually works. Keep questioning what you see, and we'll catch you on the next explainer.